This is your host, Eileen Shortall. Today's episode is titled Fact Checked, 32 Facts About John Oliver. This article has been written by Carrie Fishbane. The written version of this article can be found on HollywoodInsider.com. I will give you $100 if you can find me a comedian funnier than John Oliver. Well, I just graduated and my most valuable possession is my toothbrush, so I will give you a high five. Oliver has torn up the comedy scene and stolen all the Emmys for Best Variety Talk Series in the process. He has spent 7 seasons hosting what I'd argue is the funniest political talk show on TV. He teaches his audience about subjects other late-night shows won't dare touch because they're not mainstream enough or too boring to make funny. Yet Oliver always manages to make his show not just funny, but laugh out loud hysterical. Whether he's talking about net neutrality, local sheriffs, or doghouse foreclosures, he always manages to make every segment not only bearable to watch, but must-watch TV. I know it sounds like a drag to listen to a 30-minute lecture from the personification of the Tortoise, from the Tortoise and the Hare, with a master's in political science, but trust me, it's a lot more entertaining than it sounds. Fact 1. His parents were born in the field of education. Oliver was born in Birmingham, England, to a school headmaster and an English teacher. I suppose this might explain why his appearance and demeanor both matched the nerdy kid in every high school movie ever. In fact, as he left the womb, he was quoted as saying, "Look out, McLovin and Brian," from The Breakfast Club. There's a new nerd in town. Fact 2. He's a huge fan of Liverpool FC. As an American, it took me a while to realize that in British, a football club actually uses their feet extensively in the game. If life made sense, American football would be called handball, with occasional foot usage, but alas, Americans have been doomed to be confused by the rest of the world for all eternity. In Americanese, Liverpool FC is a soccer team. In rest of the world-ese, they're a football club. Oliver was born into a family of Liverpool fans, and he himself has been a fan since birth. Fact 3. A kid can dream. In fact, Oliver was so into football as a kid, he wanted to be a professional football player.
Supporting Liverpool was very much not a choice. That was pointed out to me pretty strenuously at an early age.
Unfortunately, his dreams of being Messi were crushed when he became a world-famous comedian. Poor kid. Fact 4. His role in his first post-college performance was really weird. In 2001, Oliver acted in the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, in which he played an oleaginous journalist. Save yourself a Google search. I looked up the meaning of oleaginous for you, even though I totally 100% already knew it. Rich in, covered with, or producing oil. Oily or greasy. What? I have so many questions. How did this journalist get oily? Why did he not shower before going to work? Was the word oleaginous specifically in his job description? Regardless, I'm sure it was funny because this sketch helped to launch Oliver's career.
That's not the point! That's not the point, is it?
So last week tonight wouldn't be a thing if the oleaginous journalist hadn't come first. Fact 5. His comedy group in the early days of his career was full of future comedy legends. The Chocolate Milk Gang seems like a rejected name for the Goonies that the director deemed too immature for the kids in the movie. But John Oliver's old adult-filled comedy troupe proudly wore this name for years. The group was filled with comedians who would be deemed icons in the future, including Russell Howard, Daniel Kitson, and Alan Cochrane. Fact 6. His dog is named after his favorite sandwich. Before his dog, Oliver hadn't had a pet since he was a 7-year-old, and it was a goldfish, so it was not necessarily a huge responsibility. Oliver wasn't sure he could take on caring for another life when he adopted his dog. I get it. Fish just swim around in their own pee all day, so fish aren't the hugest burden on a person's life. But Oliver upgraded his pet game when he and his wife welcomed Hoagie into the family. Fact 7. His wife on Last Week Tonight isn't his wife in real life. Yes, I cried too when I learned that traveling preacher for Our Lady of Perpetual Exemption tax-exempt church, Wanda Jo, wasn't Oliver's real wife.
My wife, Wanda Jo, cannot be with us this evening. She's at our summer parsonage in Hawaii for a week of spiritual introspection and occasional parasailing. Praise Wanda.
She was played by comedian and actress Rachel Dratch of Just Go With It and Click fame. Oliver is really married to Kate Norley, which still means tragedy for all the women who dreamed of dating the love child of Owl from Winnie the Pooh and Harry Potter. Fact 8. He has no desire to be famous. Perhaps he didn't knock on wood hard enough. Oliver never wanted to be famous. I think we all can understand the urge not to have a billboard of your high school yearbook photo in Times Square, but we all have our crosses to bear. Unfortunately for Oliver, his is having to constantly remind his audience of the horrendous bowl cut of his former self. Fact 9. Trouble in Minnesota. When Oliver was covering the 2008 Republican convention for The Daily Show, he was afraid of getting into any legal issues because he was only on a temporary work visa. One wrong move, and he would be shipped back to England. Oliver and his crew, at one point, passed into restricted territory. Oliver ran out of there as fast as his little feet could take him, which wasn't very fast, I'm assuming. Based on his level of nerdiness, something tells me physical exertion isn't his strong suit. Fortunately, the guards must have been fans of political comedy, because they helped protect him from guards who were more buzzkillish. Fact 10. He hosted The Daily Show for 8 weeks. Jon Stewart was working on the set of his directorial debut, Rosewater, during the summer of 2013. He needed a replacement host for The Daily Show, and you can probably guess who he picked. Hint, it's the dude who this article's about.
We'll turn the program over now to someone whose accent falsely makes you believe you can trust him, John Oliver.
Fact 11. According to Last Week Tonight showrunner Tim Carvell, Oliver was incredibly nervous when he started subbing for Jon Stewart. But the crew at The Daily Show knew that Oliver was the best fit to replace the late-night legend. Fact 12. And it's a good thing he did. The reviews for the 8 weeks Oliver hosted were so overwhelmingly positive, HBO offered him his own show shortly after. Fact 13. He had a recurring role on Community. While he was sporting his haircut that would qualify him to be a member of the Beatles, Oliver played Ian Duncan, a professor with an unfortunately low level of oleaginousness, on Community.
Are you trying to use reverse psychology on a psychologist?
No, I'm just using regular psychology on the spineless British twit.
I'm a professor. You can't talk to me that way.
Oliver played this recurring role throughout the series, but he only made occasional appearances because of his commitment to The Daily Show. But if you need some extra Oliver in your life, Community's the way to go. Fact 14. He's a workaholic. According to Jon Stewart, it may take copious amounts of weed, a meditation coach, and perhaps a straitjacket to get Oliver to chill. While at The Daily Show, Oliver would happily attend 3 a.m. shoots and arrive at work early when the sun came up to write. And this is in addition to editing his own segments on weekends. There's a fine line between being a workaholic and needing to be admitted to a mental hospital. But Oliver seems happy with his decision to commit to work. Fact 15. He met his wife while hiding out from scary Republicans. During the 2008 Republican National Convention, Oliver had to cover the event for The Daily Show. Unfortunately, Republicans are not known to be kind to progressive comedians, so Oliver needed to keep a low profile. His profile couldn't have been too low, though, because he met his future wife, Kate Norley, at this event. The two hit it off and ended up getting married in 2011. Fact 16. He thought Last Week Tonight would be easier to produce than The Daily Show. It really shouldn't be surprising that taking on a hosting gig would be more difficult than his correspondent role on The Daily Show. Unfortunately, Oliver was sorely mistaken, and Last Week Tonight requires a lot of work. Fact 17. If Oliver wanted to make Last Week Tonight more than once a week, he could. Mike Lombardo, HBO chief of programming, has said, "If John came to me tomorrow and said, 'I think we're ready to do more than once a week,' I'm with him." Unfortunately, this change has not yet happened, but perhaps it's for the better. The show is gold as it is, and why mess with a formula that's working? Fact 18. Oliver really wanted to separate his show from his former employer. The reason Last Week Tonight has no correspondence and no interviews is because Oliver didn't want his show to just be a clone of The Daily Show. Fact 19. The show could have been named Breaking News on a Weekly Basis.
Welcome to whatever this is.
It's not quite as catchy as Last Week Tonight, but if we all could tell our friends we watched breaking news on a daily basis, we comedy fans could sound like the type of people who don't just get our news from late night shows. We'd sound like the type of people who watch C-SPAN for fun. Granted, we'd be more capable of commenting on the size of Ajit Pai's Reese's coffee mug, and the fact that Boris Johnson looks like a deflated version of Trump than anything actually substantial. But we'd have the appearance of political savvy, and that's what counts. Fact 20. He was a Smurf.
Tired of looking at myself, Smurfette? As if.
Apparently, in his off time from Last Week Tonight, Oliver wears blueface. He played the very creatively named Vanity Smurf in 2011's The Smurfs. Fact 21. Some coal tycoons are such snowflakes. Gazillionaire Bob Murray got his feelings hurt and sued when Oliver slammed him and the rest of the oil industry on Last Week Tonight.
Easy protected speech to tell Bob Murray to eat shit.
Bob Murray? Is that the guy who dipped his balls in my hot dog water?
That's exactly who I'm talking about.
The suit was over an episode of Last Week Tonight in which Oliver claimed Murray looked like a geriatric Dr. Evil.
Which we did, and he does.
Which I choose not to comment on because my parents taught me if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But Oliver is right. Bullying someone's appearance may be mean, but if that person refuses to acknowledge that the collapse of a coal mine his company built, which caused 9 deaths, is his fault, then all I can say is,
Go eat shit!
Fact 22. The UK Parliament is also a snowflake. In Britain, it's illegal to make fun of Parliament on TV using videos from Parliament.
Oh, have I said too much? Have I said too much?
But it's not the easiest thing to avoid if you host a political talk show. So when videos of Parliament play during the show, you don't see them in the UK. Instead, on UK TVs, you could see different things depending on the episode. Originally, the screen just cut to black, but later on, the show showed Gilbert Gottfried reading lukewarm reviews of a restaurant in the US instead. It's the only possible and natural replacement for parliamentary footage. Fact 23. He's the man in charge at Last Week Tonight. Oliver insisted on taking 100% creative and editorial control before accepting the hosting position. Fact 24. If you need more Last Week Tonight in the show's off weeks. Like all fans, when there's no new episode in a week, there is a big John Oliver-shaped void in my life. Luckily, I found the ultimate life hack to solve the no Last Week Tonight blues. A mini segment is posted to the show's YouTube channel most weeks when no new episode comes on the air. Fact 25. In case you didn't think he passed the progressive litmus test, Oliver faced down Dustin Hoffman during what was supposed to be a lighthearted event about Hoffman's work. Why, you ask? Dustin Hoffman groped a 17-year-old on the set of a TV movie, and Oliver couldn't stand by and make light chat with a man who had done such a detestable thing.
I get no pleasure from having this conversation, but you and I are not the victims here.
This isn't the only time Oliver stood up for the Me Too movement, as he brings up the issue frequently on his show. Fact 26. Craving more Last Week Tonight? Oliver also hosts a podcast called The Bugle. Like Last Week Tonight, it is also a satirical news show. Oliver co-hosts with writer and actor Andy Zaltzman and has done so for over 10 years. Fact 27. What does it say in the theme song? If you studied Latin, you might be a bit confused by the subheadings that come along with each picture in the theme song of Last Week Tonight. Don't worry, you haven't selectively forgotten your Latin training. The words that label each picture are gibberish made to look Latin. So, unfortunately, using the language in the Last Week Tonight theme song will only get you weird looks if you happen to be traveling back in time to ancient Rome. Fact 28. The prank call heard around the US. Everyone hates robocalls. If I had to destroy my phone and throw it to a group of wild bears to do what they wish to it to avoid getting another robocall, I would. And once the bears finish, I'd grab the shattered remains of my phone and take it to the Apple Store. I'm Gen Z. I can't live without a phone. But John Oliver attempted to make it so we won't have to throw our phones for all Winnie the Poohs to stop the robocalls. The FCC is in charge of regulating robocalls. Oliver sent a robocall to the FCC with a ridiculous script and bagpipes playing afterward just to really hammer the point in that robocalls are unbearable. Fact 29. The UK and Ireland classify shows weirdly. In the UK and Ireland, Last Week Tonight has been classified under the label documentary since season 7. Okay. Just saying. I wouldn't have started watching the show if it was listed next to An Inconvenient Truth and Blackfish. But you do you, European people. Fact 30. You might not know the official taglines for Last Week Tonight. Some of them include, just like the nightly news, only weeklier, and back despite popular demand. Golf claps. Fact 31. Who does the "and now this" voice?
And now, CNN weatherman Chad Myers hates his job, his life, and everyone around him.
Occasionally, Oliver's monologue will cut to mini segments called "and now this." The segments are always announced by someone who sounds like they were born to narrate MLB games.
And now, this is not CNBC's first rodeo.
The voice is done by David Kay, who also did work in Pixar's Up and Fido. Fact 32. He doesn't want his kids to speak in an American accent.
I just like to rob banks. That's kind of my thing.
Fair enough. Nowadays, Americans tend to be like the drunk uncle who shows up at every kid's birthday party. Oliver realizes this American stereotype and consequently forbids his 2 sons from learning to speak Americanese.